Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. This is John Baker, IT Pro Evangelist with Microsoft Corporation. As you can see, my blog is blogs.technet.com/John Baker. And this is part 2 of 5 in my 5-part series on automatically migrating user settings during a Windows 7 upgrade. And we'll be talking about what's new in the USMT 4.0. The User State Migration Tool 4.0 series that we're doing here is split up into 5 parts. Part 1 is the overview of the User State Migration Tool itself. Part 2 is we'll take a look at what's new in the USMT 4.0. Part 3 is the USMT scenarios. Part 4 is the hard link migration. And then finally on Part 5, we'll take a look at using the USMT for doing offline user state capture. In Part 2 of 5, we're going to be looking at what's new in the USMT 4.0. So what's new in the USMT 4.0? Well, there's been some changes since USMT 3.0, first of which is the hard link migration store. The new hard link migration store is for use in computer refresh scenarios only. So the hard link migration stores are stored locally on the computer that's being refreshed and can migrate the user accounts, the files and settings in less time using megabytes of space rather than gigabytes of space. We also have improved space estimation, so the scan state command can now more accurately estimate the size of a migration store, as well as the additional temporary disk space required to create the migration store. This results in a reduction of migration failures due to low disk space. And the scan state command can also estimate the size of a compressed migration store. We also can gather data from an offline Windows operating system using the scan state command. So we can either scan state using WinPE, so we're scanning a system that hasn't been booted up, or we can do a scan state on a Windows old directory. Other thing to note, with version 4.0, no longer need domain controller access for running a scan state or a load state. So it's possible to complete an end-to-end migration of domain user accounts without having domain controller access. The destination computer must be domain joined before any newly applied domain accounts can be used. Also, we have integration with System Center Configuration Manager and the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, so we can reduce the end user and deployment time utilizing that integration. So we can use the USMT 4.0 to retain end users' digital identities, as well as application and operating system settings in conjunction with System Center Configuration Manager and or the Deployment Toolkit. Another new feature is configurable file errors. We can now use the new error control section in the config XML file to configure which file or registry read-write errors can be safely ignored by the /C command line option and which might cause the migration to fail. In addition, using the /genconfig command line option now generates a sample error control section that's enabled by specifying error messages and desired behaviors in the config.xml file. Another new feature, new helper functions. The scan state command now has 2 helper functions that enable new migration scenarios. MIG-XML helper.file properties function can be used to control which files migrate based on date created, date modified, date accessed, or file size. And the MIG-XML helper.generate doc patterns function can be used to automatically find user documents on a computer without authoring extensive custom migration files. Another thing we have now is volume shadow copy support. So utilizing the /VSC command line option, the scan state command can now use the volume shadow copy service to capture files that are locked for editing by other applications. You can also use the new profile control section in the config.xml file to configure the local group membership of users during migration. This enables scenarios of changing users from being members of the local administrators group to being members of the local users group during the migration. We can also list files that are migrated. So there's a /list file command line option for the scan state command, and that will generate a text list of all the files that have been included in the migration. And then finally on this slide, the USMT utils.exe. This is a new executable file that supplements the functionality of scan state and load state. So what does the USMT migrate? Well, it migrates user data. So it migrates the folders from each user profile. So when you specify the MIG-user.xml file, the USMT migrates everything that's in a user's profile, including the My Documents, My Videos, My Music, My Pictures, desktop files, the Start menu, the Quick Launch settings, and favorites. It also migrates folders for all users and public profiles. So when you specify the MIG user XML file, the USMT migrates the all users profile in Windows XP or the public profile in Windows Vista or Windows 7. The shared documents, the shared video, the shared music, the shared desktop files, the shared pictures, the shared start menu, and the shared favorites. File types. When you specify the miguser.xml file, the ScanState tool searches the fixed drives and collects and migrates files with any of the extensions that are included in that miguser.xml file. And in that, we have the extensions for Word documents, for PowerPoints. There's about 20 or 30 different extensions that are out of the box in that XML file. If you want to take a look at it, and you can also go in there obviously and customize it. It also migrates the access control list. So the USMT migrates the ACLs for specified files and folders from computers running both Windows XP and Windows Vista. So for example, if you migrate a file that's called file.txt that is read-only for user A and read-write for user B, those settings will apply on the destination computer after the migration. So it maintains those ACLs. Operating system components. The USMT migrates operating system components to a destination computer running Windows 7 from computers running XP, Vista, or Windows 7. So the kind of components that get migrated by default are things like accessibility settings, address, desktop wallpaper, EFS files, favorites, folder options, group membership, network drive mappings, remote access, all these kind of things. And if you go to the user state migration tool user guide, you can get a full list of the various operating system components that are migrated. So application settings, obviously Microsoft Office applications get migrated, and there's a slew of other applications that get migrated. I got a couple of samples up there: Acrobat, Firefox, etc. If you open up the mig.xml file, you can see all the applications that are already pre-configured in that XML file. I'll give you a couple of other examples: Apple Safari, Google Chrome, Outlook Express, Microsoft Project, Windows Mail, Windows Live Writer gets migrated. So all those settings are migrated. If you've got Zune settings, those will be migrated too. So again, just take a look. If you want to see exactly what's configured, open up the migapp.xml file and you'll see all the applications and what settings have been configured to be migrated for those applications. Well, we just talked about what the USMT 4.0 does migrate. So now let's look at what it does not migrate. So the USMT 4.0 does not migrate the following application settings. It doesn't migrate settings from earlier versions of an application. So versions of each application must match on the source and on the destination computer. This is because the USMT does not support migrating settings of an earlier version of an application to a later version. There are exceptions to this rule. The one exception is Microsoft Office. USMT is able to migrate from an earlier version to a later version of Office. Also application settings and some operating system settings when the local account is created. So for example, if you run the /lac to create local accounts on the destination computer, the USMT will migrate that user data, but only some of the operating system settings such as the wallpaper and the screensaver settings, but no application settings get migrated for that local user. Microsoft Project settings. When migrating from Office 2003 to Office 2007, those settings are not migrated. And if you use an ICQ Pro settings, if the ICQ is installed in a different location on the destination computer, you are not going to be able to migrate the settings. To successfully migrate the settings for ICQ Pro, you've got to install ICQ Pro in the same location on the destination computer as it was on the source computer. So we saw what application settings don't get migrated by the USMT. What about operating system settings? What operating system settings do not get migrated by the USMT? Well, there's several to be listed here. Things like local printers, hardware-related settings, drivers, passwords, application binary files, synchronization files, DLL files, and other executable files. None of those are migrated. Permissions on shared folders. After migration, you have to manually reshare any folder that was shared on the source computer. And files and setting migration between operating systems in a different language, you cannot do this. The operating system of the source computer must match the language of the operating system of the destination computer. Customize icons for shortcuts may not migrate either. You'll have to do some testing here. Taskbar settings. When the source computer is running XP, the taskbar settings will not migrate. And there's also some firewall settings that are not migrated from if the source computer is running Windows XP. The first of which is obviously ICS, or internet connection sharing. That's not migrated because it can make the network less secure if it's migrated to the destination computer. Also, the firewall advanced configurations settings are not migrated because of increased security risks. And then finally, the bridge settings are not migrated. For example, if you're bridging a virtual private network to a second network adapter, those are not migrated. And here in my call to action and resources slide, at the top I have my online presence. So I've got a blog, blogs.technet.com/John Baker. I also have a landing page for deployment essentials on the microsoft.com/events/series/deploymentessentials.aspx. And that's where I have my screencast videos hosted. And then in the middle of that slide, you'll see the Windows Automated Installation Kit, or Wake, for Windows 7, which is the latest version of the Wake. And I've put a bit.ly link up there for it, which is bit.ly/lowercase fp, uppercase N, 90 lowercase z. So that will get you to the Wake for Windows 7. And then there's also a Windows 7 walkthrough of the user state migration tool. And again, I put a bit.ly link up there, and it's bit.ly/lowercase fcz, uppercase I, lowercase x, 6. And that concludes part 2 of this series. Thank you for listening. And up next is part 3 of 5, which is the user state migration tool scenarios. So again, thanks for listening. Join me in part 3.